All right. I'm very excited to have on Bad Faith Podcast today Minnesota Representative Dean Phillips, who is also running for President of the United States of America. Welcome to Bad Faith.
It is great to be with you, Brianna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let me ask you right off the top, have you done many progressive, like lefty, kind of Bernie Bro universe style podcasts yet?
Well, I'm in that stage of a campaign, Brianna, where you kind of go to any platform that will have you, any club that wants to invite you, you'll join. And I'll tell you, not as many as I'd like. In fact, I'm kind of surprised and disappointed that kind of lefty world, if you will, is kind of practicing ignorance, and more center and even center right platforms are willingly inviting me, which is disappointing because I want to both listen, learn, and also make my case. So I want to thank you, most importantly. And hey, by the way, MSNBC only extended their first invitation to me in 4 months on Sunday morning. So there you have it. That's all you need to know. And I just think more speech is better than no speech. Yeah.
I did see that, and that, from my subjective perspective, was a tough interview, not because of you, but because of the nature of the questions that were put to you, which is part of why I was asking about what kind of interviews you've done so far, because I do think that the audience you're speaking to right now is manifestly different from those that you've been encountering so far. And this is the main reason. Even if there are ideological differences between you and your platform and people on the left, you've pitched yourself, I think, rather effectively to the mainstream as a Biden, but younger, and politically very similar and aligned. When you use that line on Pod Save America, it seemed to upset them because they didn't understand the value of the but younger part, right? But you really seem to understand what all these polls are saying, which is that a lot of the discontent with Biden isn't substantive, although much of it is. Much of it is about the fact that people are increasingly concerned about his ability to have the stamina to make it through the election season, much less the next 4 years.
Yeah. And by the way, we have a lot of policy differences, and I'd love to talk about some of those too, but I want to start with the most important, which is I'm not really running against Joe Biden. I'm running against Donald Trump. And I want to start with that because that's what this is really all about. It is existential. It is acute. It's a serious, serious predicament in which we find ourselves, not because Joe Biden is a good man. I think most of us would agree he is. But the numbers, the data, which is all we have to make good decisions with, is showing a disaster forthcoming. The lowest approval numbers in measured history. He's 5 points below Donald Trump at the same stage in his presidency. He's 19 points below Jimmy Carter in January of 1980 when he got wiped out by Ronald Reagan. We all know the battleground polls. So yes, I'm younger, but I'm not Joe Biden. In fact, there's nothing remotely similar to me. I'm pragmatic. I like to find ways to get things done. I don't like the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And I think progressives should sometimes use strategies of incrementalism if we can make progress. But boy, am I different than he is. And I'd love to talk about some of those policies. But most of all, it's about winning.
So on the winning piece, the reason that I set up the difference between, let's say, the MSNBC audience and the kind of questions you got, and this audience and the kind of questions that I'm about to ask is this. I think where MSNBC is most frustrated with you, where the mainstream establishment press is most frustrated with you, is that you have the audacity to challenge an incumbent. That's point blank, period. DNC party chairs, Jamie Harrison, MSNBC host, Simone Sanders, people all up and down that segment of politics have declared as a matter of principle that there will be no primary. There is no primary. They have only, as you pointed out, reluctantly covered it, only extending this invitation to you. What was that, last week or earlier this week, after 4 months of campaigning, offering town halls to all or most of the Republican candidates, despite having massive ideological differences with them, but not being willing to even acknowledge, frankly, that you or Marianne Williamson, who obviously just recently dropped out, or Cenk Uygur are even in the mix. That being said, this audience thinks that's the best thing about you. The best thing about you is that they believe—
It's nice to meet you all.
They believe that it is important to have a primary, that it's democratic to have a primary, especially when there are these really big ticket issues that are not being reflected in the electoral options for 2024, but about which there are pluralities of Americans that subscribe to these beliefs. One of those is Medicare for all, which, as I'm sure you're aware, 88% of Democrats support, but you'll be hard pressed to find very many presidential candidates or, frankly, very many people in Congress who are willing to do more than, in a cursory fashion, sign on to various Medicare for All bills they know aren't actually going to go anywhere. You came to Medicare for All kind of late in the game in a way that I think raised some eyebrows and some skepticism
Sure.
for some folks on the left. So I want to give you an opportunity to speak to why Medicare for All now.
So let me start in many, many years ago. My daughter, Pia, was 13 years old, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And of course, it changed her life and my family's and mine. And when she was at Children's Hospital in Minneapolis, we really recognized as a family privilege. Pia was there during long days, and I was there, and her mother was there, and family, sister, cousins, all day long. But what Pia noticed is in her hallway with other young cancer patients, most of them didn't have a single visitor during the day. A mom, maybe a dad stopped by in the morning, later at night. Of course, they couldn't get work off. We had no paid family leave. And many of them didn't have insurance. And Pia recognized this at a really young age and actually started an organization called PABS Packs with one of her dear friends, Abby Nelson. And they distributed little beautiful backpacks filled with cozy items to give to kids who had chronic conditions at children's hospitals. But I refer to this because that was the first time I really recognized I'd taken it for granted. We had businesses where we afforded healthcare to everybody. I always had wonderful healthcare. I grew up in Minnesota, which has the Mayo Clinic and better healthcare than most states. I took it for granted. Then I became the board chair of the largest health delivery system in Minnesota. And I saw firsthand how unbelievably broken this entire system is. We don't have healthcare, we have sick care. And I want people to know the difference. If we had healthcare, we use something called a capitated model where you get a bulk sum per patient, and it gives the hospital or the health system an incentive to keep you healthy. Right now, they only get rewarded with revenue if you get sick, and then they charge you based on services. So it's fee for service. Their incentive is to do as many tests and x-rays and give you as much medicine, keep you in the hospital, so they make money. I want to change the system so you can actually keep people out of the hospital. And then I learned we have 25 million Americans who have no health insurance at all, 90 million underinsured. The health system for which I served on the board and became board chair, I think we afforded about $100 million a year in what we called uncompensated care, which is simply covering the costs of people who had no insurance at all. And I started to recognize this system isn't a system and it's woefully broken. Then I'm elected to Congress and I'm representing in my own district the largest health insurer in the entire world, United Health Group. Tens of thousands of their employees live and work in my district, make handsome salaries. And I'll tell you, I think I was subject to the Kool-Aid, if you will. And only after I really opened my eyes being in Congress in the last number of months, traveling the country, listening to the most heartbreaking stories, 2/3 of all bankruptcies in America because people have medical debt, underinsured people getting surprise bills and getting tens of thousands of dollars of charges they didn't expect, learning that the pharma industry charges us, we Americans, $250 billion a year more than they charge any other country in the world if they applied the same pricing to us, which, by the way, would cover every single one of those 25 million uninsured Americans. I finally came to the conclusion after being a public option supporter. Then I joined, I think it was Ro Khanna's bill to ensure that a Medicare for All plan could be done in any individual state with a federal waiver. I finally came to the conclusion earlier this year, working with Pramila Jayapal, that the only way forward is a national health insurance system. And what I came to realize is this: A, we will save money. B, we will save lives. And C, it is not that the country doesn't want it. It's that Republicans had for so many years positioned it as the socialist takeover of healthcare, meaning they were telling voters that if we had a Medicare for All system or a single payer system, that suddenly government would be in the hospital business. That's not how it works. And once I kind of put all these things together, I came to the conclusion that I'm going to go against the biggest health insurer in my district. Sadly, many of the people that work for them in my district are very angry with me. But I realize that it is in the best interest of our country. It is the only way we're going to establish a mental and emotional healthcare system. And it's the right thing to do. Lastly, for my conservative friends that like competition and like options, that's the beautiful thing. You want to use extra dollars to do concierge care with your own private money? By all means. The only way we need to look at this is just like public education. There's a education system for everybody, If you want to do private, parochial, charter, homeschool, you can do that too. Same with healthcare. That's my proposition. I came to it the old-fashioned way, keeping my heart open, my mind open, personal experience, but most importantly, listening to the worst stories, the most heartbreaking stories in the country you can imagine. And it's the right thing to do. And I'm ready to repackage it and present it to conservative Americans as a way that will help all Americans.
So, Representative, the cynical read here. Look, I think most of us would say, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. We're very happy that you've come to this position, and that's a wonderful thing. But the more cynical read is that the timing of this feels in and of itself cynical, and that
I understand.
The Medicare for All movement really burst through to the fore almost 8 years ago now with the first Bernie Sanders campaign. At that point, even 5-6 years ago, we had polls demonstrating that overwhelming majorities of Americans, including super overwhelming majorities of Democrats, supported this. I think the current poll is that 49% of Republicans support Medicare for All, even though the Democratic Party has said almost nothing about the issue since the end of Bernie's campaign in April of 2020. And yet the polls have held firm, because I think there's a really intrinsic understanding of the brokenness of our system at this point, and that's not going anywhere. So what do you say to people who might believe that the reality is that, you've been a congressman, you've had the experiences of talking to people in your district. I'm sure this isn't the first time in the context of this campaign that you've spoken to constituents who have been struggling with healthcare, since it is such a almost universal experience that we've all had a lapse in our coverage, some kind of healthcare crisis, struggled to afford bills, struggled to afford dental care, which is usually not covered in the least, or if you do have coverage, it's basically pointless. Why now? Why should people believe that this is a sincere effort and an investment, especially since, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe you endorsed any of the Medicare for All candidates back in 2020.
Well, let me to answer your question, totally reasonable question. First of all, the coming to this conclusion was actually well before I ran for president. I was working with Pramila Jayapal on endorsing it in earlier 2023. And then frankly, at a point where I was about to do it naturally, that's when I decided I had to run for president. And that's when I thought it would be actually really stupid to do, because it would seem like it was so shameless. So just so you know, that was going on for a long time before. I've always been an advocate of the public option because I thought that was the best way to get it done. Give Americans a choice. You can buy into Medicare for All at any age. If you like it, why wouldn't you stick with it? It's portable. You enjoy it, and then Americans make the choice. Because I actually like to get things done, Brianna. A lot of the progressive principles I share, but they're packaged with slogans and wrapping that makes it so unpalatable to the right that we never get anything done. So I like the public option. I was an early supporter.
Give us an example of that in the healthcare context. Is Medicare for All? Do you think that the struggle with getting that passed is because of sloganeering?
Absolutely.
How so?
In fact,
which slogan?
Here's the problem. Here's the problem in progressive politics. The right will paint Bernie Sanders, AOC, Pramila Jayapal as socialist, leftist, communists. So anything they say now, anything they say is positioned as that must be a socialist proposition. People won't open their eyes. I do a series at home, and I want to also finish my answer and come back to this quickly. And I mentioned working with Pramila earlier this year, but I've long favored a Medicare for All by state initiative that the federal government would give a waiver to states. I've been on that bill from the first term I think I served in Congress, because I'm pragmatic. I actually want to get it done. And states are in a much better position, I felt, to do so. I've come to the conclusion that that's not going to happen. So hence my migration. And then third, I come from a district, like I said, prosperous, great access to healthcare. Very few people have none. And United Health Group is the biggest employer by far in the district that I represent. This wasn't as big of a deal in my district until my time in Washington, traveling the country, having people come to my office, meeting with people who've gone bankrupt, who couldn't buy insulin and lost children because they had to make a decision on food or insulin. It was heartbreaking. And I have absolutely concluded this is the only way forward. Back to your other question. The problem is, yes, we have things like defund the police. We have
but we're talking about Medicare for All, Representative.
Brianna,
to
you
stick to
asked me the
healthcare
question
for a
about
second.
progressive policies. Well, no, but you asked me the
No,
question about
I asked you,
packaging.
in all fairness, I asked you a narrow question. You brought up sloganeering as an obstacle to Medicare for all.
And you
So
asked
I'm
me for other
asking you,
examples.
no, I didn't actually.
Oh,
I specifically am asking you
okay.
about Medicare for all. So do you think that the obstacle, because this is what I'm getting at. My belief is not that the reason we don't have Medicare for all is because people don't like it or they're turned off by slogans or they think it's socialist. Because as I've now articulated a couple of times, polls suggest that even with all of that negative press, Republicans, half of Republicans want Medicare for all, not to
Sure.
mention 88% of Democrats. So it seems to me that we're not in a persuasion land here where we have to convince folks it's a good idea. We're in the land of representatives who are not following up on what their constituents are saying they want from them for various reasons that I could point to. But I want to hear from you what you really think the obstacle is here, if it's not, in fact, a persuasion issue.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it is. It's because it was positioned and packaged as a fundamental and originally kind of far left proposition from people who are associated with the far left. And God bless them. But to the overwhelming majority of centrist and center right and right Americans, anything that comes from them, I'm just, you know how it works, is Green New Deal, defund the police, Medicare for all these propositions, free education, things that, many would say totally reasonable, but they're coming from places that are positioned immediately, oftentimes because of right-wing media positioning it as such, as non-palatable. And the truth of the matter is, I come from a marketing background, and I know we can repackage a lot of these propositions and also re-promote them. Medicare for all actually will save lives. It will save money. It will reduce our pharmaceutical expenditures by about $250 billion a year. I didn't even know this when I came to Congress. When I started doing my own work.
Everyone who listens to this podcast does know that because in large part, they were supporters of Bernie Sanders, who was saying all of these exact things, both in 2016 and 2020. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's this question as to why you, as someone who has been in Congress, who has certainly been exposed to these issues, is coming to it at this point. But my real question here is, why do we need to repackage and rebrand Medicare for all when polls suggest that everyone already wants it, including half of Republicans already want it? What is the rebranding exercise trying to accomplish here?
Let me talk to you about the real obstruction is this: money in politics, Brianna.
Right.
It's money in politics.
Please.
Pharma, big. Okay. And by the way, I'm the only member of Congress, 535 people. The only one takes no PAC money of any kind, corporate, any other special interest, no lobbyist money. I don't take member of Congress money. I don't give member of Congress money. And I don't have a leadership PAC, which of course, most of you know is just a slush fund for politicians. So what do these industries do like pharma? They spend millions of dollars handing out $5,000 checks in white envelopes to every member of Congress. They hire teams of lobbyists, and all the ear time with members of Congress is spent with the wealthy, the well-connected, and the lobbying class. They're not listening to people all around the country, and that's the truth. And that's why we have the status quo remain in place forever and ever and ever. I'm not subject to all that. You can probably tell I'm someone who does not mind taking a lot of heat, taking the attacks, because I have a little bit of courage that most of my colleagues seem not to have. And I don't care what the big companies think. I don't care about the money in politics. I come to my own conclusions. I think you were wondering why I changed my perspective. I think everybody should open their hearts and minds to changing their perspective. I'm changing all the time. Once I'm with other people or hear new stories, I see new information. And I consider policy. I'm not a lifelong politician. I've been doing this for 5 years in Congress. And I'm a studier and I'm a listener. I don't take the money. I don't spend the time with all the lobbyists. So therefore, I'm able to do this in a way that's different. And I'd rather talk about the why and some of the other policies. And considering I'm probably one of the most, quote unquote, moderate members of the United States Congress who is now championing it in a way that I think is really, really different, I'd love to talk about it. But at the end of the day, you ask why? We need campaign finance reform because everybody is bought and sold in Washington. And then also, we need to be better marketers, Brianna, because the fact of the matter is legislation is a product. Products require packaging and products require marketing. And whoever markets it best wins. And the right is a much better marketing machine than the left. That's why we can't get shit done. And I'm being honest with you.
I don't disagree with that. And in fact, the most recent episode of this podcast, I spoke with Anand Shenka Osorio, who is a messaging marvel and who I respect a lot and who gives really good advice, frankly, to Democrats to help them win, even if I think they sometimes don't deserve her advice.
Yep.
And they often don't take her advice. And the ones that don't, her track record is very good. The ones that don't take her advice are less successful. And I think part of the problem is, and we talked about this, part of the problem is that there's a messaging issue, and part of the problem is that there's a substantive politics issue. And why I'm pressing on this, and we can move to other issues, but this is Medicare for All is the big one for a lot of people in this community.
Sure.
And the reason I'm pressing on this is because part of what I believe is a kind of a misinformation campaign is this centrist narrative that the reason we can't have nice things is because they're not popular, even as we see poll after poll after poll demonstrating that that's not the case. And so I bristle a little. I got to say, I got to push back if there's a characterization of a branding issue with Medicare for All, when in fact, the analysis that we are doing here on the left is to say, why is it that when we have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president in the middle of a pandemic,
Yep.
we don't have a floor vote on the question of Medicare for All? We don't have hearings on the question of Medicare for All. We had 14 million Americans, 15 million Americans kicked off their health insurance because they lost their jobs in the middle of a pandemic. And there was no effort to push for a vote for Medicare for All, even though the narrow margins of Democrats in the House made it so that a small group of squad members who purport to support this policy could have withheld their votes for Nancy Pelosi in much the same way that Republicans just withheld their vote and ultimately ousted Kevin McCarthy in order to force her to bring that to a floor vote. So please.
Yeah. Well, first of all, look what happened to Democrats after passing the ACA, which wasn't even close to what we needed. So many lost their jobs. They still talk about it in the halls of Congress. You know, the truth is, Brianna, Congress doesn't want to solve problems because if you solve them, you lose your job. Therefore, it's much better to complain about them and bedevil the other side. By the way, why didn't Democrats codify women's reproductive rights in the last 50 years?
That's a very good question.
Why? You know, I tell you why. Why did Republicans, after telling us how horrible the border is, which, by the way, it is, and what a crisis, national security and now constitutional crisis it is, why, when they got to the precipice of actually getting something really meaningful done, did they peel it all back? Why? Because if you solve the problem, you might lose your job. That's why. That's exactly why. It makes perfect sense. And the fact of the matter is, I was also subject to the propaganda against Medicare for All because I was not a politician my whole life. I was a rank and file citizen of the United States who finally activated in 2016 because of Donald Trump. People like me are the exact people who have to be enlightened and educated and brought along. I know how to do it. And I'm very honest when it comes to packaging. Calling it Medicare for All is a big mistake, is the truth. What we should call it is national health insurance, because that is interesting to conservatives because, I hate the insurance companies. It's for everybody. I won't have to choose my job to choose my benefits. And you know what? Actually, if it's like Medicare, that could be kind of cool. We have to rebrand. And it is true. I'm just telling you from experience and how things work in Congress. Those are the reasons nothing gets done.
I'm wondering, do you have any actual polling data on that? Because my understanding was quite the opposite, that nationalizing things is scary to Americans and that Medicare for All polls much better than some of those other terms, even universal health care, and that there's a reason why Medicare for All was adopted as a phrase as opposed to some of these other options. Because Medicare is the most popular government program in the country.
Yeah, but for people that don't have it, they think it is some type of a socialist system. Here's the problem.
But everybody either has it or has a person in their loved one, an older person in their life who has it. I mean, it's not an abstraction. Medicare is genuinely universal. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you asked me the why about the name, and here's the reason. For a long time, the Republican Party and the right media has said Medicare for All is the socialized takeover of the health system. And they insinuated and sometimes explicitly said, government will be your doctor. They'll have death panels. You can't go where you want, right? That's how they positioned it. So that is baked into people's minds all around the country. Get away from Medicare for All, repackage it, just come out with something, a new name, new packaging, new messages, and call it something new. People they're forced to take a look at it. If we don't pivot a little bit, it's going to be the same thing over and over.
Okay.
And that's
I just
my
pulled up a poll.
But that's the big issue.
Mm-hmm. So granted, this is from 2016, but I just pulled up a poll by an article is written by Drew Altman. It's called "In Healthcare, Democrats' Reactions Very Dependent on Labeling." If it's Medicare for all, that's the most positive result, with 53% of the public, this is back in 2016, saying it was very positive, 28% somewhat positive, 11% somewhat negative, 4% very negative. Your guaranteed universal coverage does well, slightly less well, with 44% very positive as compared to 53% very positive, and similar down the line. Single payer healthcare insurance system, there's a significant drop off, with only 21%. Again, Medicare for all was 53% very positive, 37% somewhat positive, slightly bigger than the Medicare for all section, which was at 28%. And then much more in the negative, 22% somewhat, 6% very negative. And socialized medicine did quite obviously the worst among those labels. So again, I hear you. I'm not shut down to the idea that in some ways there's like better words for everything always that people can continue to workshop. But this is why it matters to me. I don't want, I think, and I speak for a lot of people listening, there to be a focus on continuing to try to market something popular when the obstacle to Medicare for all actually being brought to a vote is people being unwilling to do so because they are bought and captured by the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry. And this is why this is important. If you say something during an election, but you don't demonstrate a willingness to be adversarial within your own party, because at the end of the day, there was Democratic control of Congress and a Democratic president in the middle of a pandemic with a lot of goodwill behind pushing forward one of these types of policies.
Yep.
And they chose not to do that. So you can't say it's Republicans. You can't say it's branding. You have to look inward and ask, why is it a Democratic caucus that won't do this?
Well, Brianna, there's no question. I mean, Speaker Pelosi, and let me just remind everybody, there are 4 people now running for president of the United States of America in the 2 major parties. Donald Trump, right? Nikki Haley, Joe Biden, and Dean Phillips. You're talking to the only one that supports Medicare for all. The only one. And I'm also someone who doesn't give a flying you-know-what about what my party thinks, as evidenced by the fact that I'm even sitting here being interviewed by you running for president. That's the whole problem. We don't have great leaders in Congress. We don't have great leaders in Washington. All they care about, Brianna, is winning the next election. And if the polling says, if you talk about this, you're going to lose, nobody does it. That's why we have a bunch of sheep. You know, if you can't tell, I've already torpedoed my career in Congress. I am unbridled. I am willing to do whatever is necessary to do better for our country, raise the foundation. Yes, Medicare for all. Yes, college education with no debt. Yes, 7 million new homes so people can have a place to live that costs something they can afford, and reduce the cost of food and life in this country, right? I know how to do these things, and I'm going to do it. And you're talking to the only one that maybe has the courage to actually tell the truth right now. And we need leaders in both the White House, the Senate, and the House who are willing to do what's right for the country and lose their jobs. And that's what I'm trying to tell you is the reason that you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head. The ACA left such a, literally, over 15, I think it's 15 years now. It has left a tale of fear amongst Democrats where they don't ever want to go back there. And it's going to take new leadership. I intend to be that person. And I believe it or not, I think with some repackaging, repositioning, that a national health insurance system, Medicare for all, call it what we will, is absolutely achievable, because I'm going to demonstrate to conservatives how much money we will save, how much lives we will save, how diseases of despair will drop, how, by the way, they say that the way to reduce gun violence is mental and emotional health care. And eye care and dental care are great determiners of long-term health outcomes. So it makes so much sense. And I intend to be that advocate.
I think it will be wonderful if more Republicans get on board. But when you say that, it makes it sound like you think that's contingent. You don't need any more Republicans on board. It's like saying there's a million Democratic policies that they support all the time.
House, but Brianna, we still have a filibuster.
No. Congressman, we had.
Oh, in the past. Well, I wasn't there. I can't. What can I do about that?
But that's the point. When you see a Democrat, this is the shell game that the left believes Democrats are playing. They say we want to do all these things. They say you have to vote for us, even though we don't believe in. And then they don't do anything. So what we want before we invest in a candidate is some demonstration that they are willing to be adversarial to the party and not just be telling us things, because the Democratic branding is that we're good for people. We like people. We care about minorities. We care about reproductive rights. We care about gay rights. Like, they say all those things.
And then
they spend 50 years not codifying Roe, not pushing through the PRO Act. We had this moment at the beginning with the must pass COVID relief bill, where a $15 minimum wage was attached. It is not exactly a progressive policy, $15 minimum wage, overwhelming public support. Biden said that that was going to be core to his platform when he was running. And when Bernie conceded to him, he asked, you're going to push $15, right? And he said, I'm going to push $15. Mm-hmm. And what did he do? The Democrats did this machination where they blamed it on the parliamentarian. They got Chuck Schumer to take it out of the bill on the basis of the parliamentarian's non-vote, that they could have just ignored. And instead of having an opportunity to push it through as part of must-pass COVID relief legislation that Republicans had to vote for, they took it out. And then Bernie tried to get it back in, but of course needed 60 votes to put it back in. And it would have only needed the 50 votes plus a tiebreaker to pass with the budget reconciliation. And so Democrats can say it's not my fault, it's Republicans. But we all know here on this podcast with a finer comb, we know the reality of the situation. So that's
Brianna,
all
I don't know,
where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I totally get it. And by the way, I don't know a single member of the House or Senate who's a Democrat that has been more adversarial with his or her party than the one you're talking to right now. If you think I care about re-elections, if you think I care about what leadership thinks, nah, that's why I'm in front of you right now. I am so sick and tired after 3 terms of what I've seen in the Congress, from my own party, from the other side, from the White House, from the culture of nonsense, the culture of corruption, the culture of being sheep and silent when we should be loud and standing up and doing something about it. I'm sick of it. That's why I'm in front of you. And by the way, we got 2 choices right now, Joe Biden or me. We got 2 choices.
Well, that's true in a Democratic primary representative, but there's a lot of people in this audience that may, because we all get a primary vote, be interested in voting for you, especially as a sort of a protest vote against Joe Biden. And because frankly, from a policy perspective, even though there's some qualms, which we'll get to, you are better on some of these better issues, even if we don't have any guarantees about follow through, even rhetorically, it's better than Biden. However, many people in this podcast believe that ultimately we need to break the 2-party system, and they're very happy to take this kind of unprecedented moment of interest in third-party campaigns to register a protest vote in the general, and not just a protest vote, mind you. Of course, votes for the Green Party help it get, if it gets to 5%, it gets federal matching funds and helps a political effort that a lot of people who listen to this podcast really believe in. So I do want to, let's pivot off healthcare for a second. Tell me about your experiences running in what should be a real primary. Because I've seen you tweet and talk about being surprised by the amount of pushback you've gotten from the Democratic establishment.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. Brianna, this goes back to what I talked to you about healthcare and how through opening my eyes, my head, my heart to realities, I can change my mind. And by the way, I took our party for granted. I thought the Democratic Party had robust principles that were protectors of democracy, that were transparent, that were honest, that promoted candidates, promoted voters, promoted debate. And you know what I found? Just the opposite. You know this better than I, probably because of your experience with Senator Sanders. And I think you're right. We need competition badly. But we have 2 parties that have set up all the rules that actually make the creation of a competitor really difficult. And without ranked choice voting, without gerrymandering reform, without some other reforms, I think it's going to be awfully hard. And by the way, I will never tell anybody not to vote for someone in whom they believe. Jill Stein, Cornel West, RFK Jr., whoever the heck it is, but at least understand the consequences of one's vote. That's absolutely the case. But here's the truth about our party right now. I was trapped in the House chamber on January 6th. Call it what you will. An insurrection is what I call it, a mob, a riot. The fact of the matter is they were trying to prevent the counting of ballots. That was their objective. Well, our party right now is preventing the printing of ballots in Florida, in North Carolina. They tried in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court overturned them. In New Hampshire, the Democratic National Committee just received a cease and desist letter from the Attorney General in New Hampshire for the unlawful suppression of voters. Massachusetts, they tried, and the Secretary of State overturned them. So I'm telling you right now, Democrats, the Democratic Party is suppressing voters, not even letting Democrats in Florida and North Carolina vote in a primary, not even letting them. Secondly,
and so for people who don't know what's going on there, they're saying that they're not letting you put your name on the ballot.
Yeah, the Democratic Party only put Joe Biden's name on the ballot. And you know what? They're not public entities. They can do what the heck they want, but people should know The party that talks about voting rights, voting access in Florida is literally suppressing 4 million potential Democratic voters in the state of Florida. Same with North Carolina. By the way, the law is pretty clear in North Carolina. Any nationally recognized candidate for president shall be on the ballot. 2020, you see 12, 14 people on the ballot. They denied it. Wisconsin tried the same thing. The Supreme Court of Wisconsin literally 3 days ago overturned it. That's what's happening. And I want to make sure people are aware of the truth. Joe Biden won't do a debate. They're suppressing candidates and they're suppressing voters. Both parties, Brianna, are corrupt. They're working against the very principles that I thought were being supported by those in positions of power in Washington. And you're right. If you're angry, join me, because I'm trying to fix this from the inside. And I may be the last chance, because everybody around in Washington is a traditionalist that is so angry at me for exposing the truth that, by the way, I used to be an enabler. I used to make fun of the man you worked for, Senator Sanders, because I thought he was a sore loser. You know what? Now I've discovered, and that's why I tweeted about 2 months ago that I apologize, because he's right and I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth. And that's why this little sign here, I say the quiet part out loud. I don't care what it does to me. I'm going to tell the truth and I'm going to call it like I see it. And no one is going to pull the wool over this country's eyes any longer, period.
I appreciate you saying that, Representative. But it does beg the question, and Marianne Williamson has gotten this question a lot from the left as well. Knowing what we know about how Bernie was treated, knowing what we know about the DNC lawsuit, where they argued, as you've pointed out, that they are a private entity that doesn't have to host a fair election. And seeing, frankly, Bernie Sanders, with all that he had going for him, out fundraising everyone in the race in 2020, having national name recognition, being a senator with a long record of integrity and achievement in Congress that got him a lot of plaudits and respect across the aisle, all of these things that most insurgent left candidates don't have, still being unsuccessful in no small part because of media bias and party bias. A lot of people then say, well, then why are we even still trying to fight within the system to begin with? If our squad members won't withhold the vote for Nancy Pelosi, if they are able to be whipped, as was reported at the time by Pramila Jayapal, into not making a stink over the $15 minimum wage not being a part of the budget reconciliation bill, if they're stripping your name off the ballot, if they're suing Green Party candidates like Matthew Hoh off the ballot in North Carolina, why then should we contribute to the fiction of there being two parties in the United States of America and not throw our lot in with independence? And I want to ask you pointedly, did you consider running as an independent, and would you consider running as an independent at the end of this primary cycle?
So I can't answer the question until we all acknowledge the risk this year, which is Donald Trump. And I wish it wasn't the truth, but there's no question. The lens through which I'm looking right now, Brianna, and I hope everyone watching, is the consequences of any decision we make and how that might help Donald Trump return to the White House. And I'm sure I speak for just about everyone right now. I don't want to be part of that. I want to make sure he doesn't return. I will do anything. I will give up anything. I will invest anything to prevent that. That's why I'm doing this. In the absence of anybody willing to participate in democracy, and seeing our president at 81, going to be 82, clearly in physical decline, lowest approval numbers in history, and losing in all the battleground states, I couldn't believe that the Democratic Party of the United States of America would be so myopic and have such blinders on and propagate such a ridiculous delusion that someone had to do it. And I totally understand why people want alternatives. They want competition. And I think long term, by the way, you asked the question, because my principles dictate, I try to change something from the inside before I try to do it from the outside. And usually it's a lot more successful, because once you do it, if you're on the outside looking in, you don't have access to the levers. Right now, I'm in a really unusual place. And that's why I want to make an appeal to everybody watching right now. If you really want to give this a try, mark my words, I got nothing to lose. I'm not going back to the House. I'm not going to the Senate. You know, the fact of the matter is Bernie Sanders was not a Democrat. I am a Democrat. I'm going to go to that convention. I'm going to have delegates. I'm going to work my tail off, and I'm going to bust down the doors and tell the truth. And I'm going to do it from the inside. The sad thing is Donald Trump did that from the inside on the GOP, but look what he did to that party. He destroyed it. I want to do it in a methodical, thoughtful, accretive way that gives voice to people, rewards talent, right? rewards those who are willing to do the right thing and actually maybe lose their jobs by doing the right thing, and be transparent and honest and actually promote democracy. Doing it from the outside is really hard because the system is designed to prevent it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. right now is finding that out, had to raise $15 million just to get on the ballot. That's how tough it is. And then you have no state organization. It's very complicated. I'd love to have that long conversation because depending how this works out, I may be doing that because this system, this duopoly, the political industrial complex is really, really rotten. Really rotten.
That's very interesting. That's some serious breaking news there, Representative Phillips. The idea that you would consider going it as an independent, depending on what happens
down the road. No. Let me back this up. No, down the road. No. This election, I'm really clear. Data. Everyone, please look at the data. Do nothing. Please consider in this election, no matter who you love, who you hate, please make your choice based on preventing Donald Trump from winning, because at the end of the day, that's my point. And data will drive my decision on everything. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. You have been very articulate and persuasive about the choice the Democratic Party has made to make your life more difficult and your run next to impossible.
Yeah.
Despite the polls that, as you again have so clearly articulated, show that Trump is all but a shoo-in. It's not just the national polls, it's the polls in all the swing states that show Joe Biden down as much as 10 points, right? And we'll get to the issue of Israel-Palestine, but that's really hurting him in states like Michigan with significant Arab and Muslim American populations. Okay. And I don't see that hole being dug out of anytime soon. So the question is, whatever you think of Donald Trump, and I'm warning you that people in this audience do not have that same sense of fear and absolutism when it comes to Donald Trump that many people but this is the question. Why should some working class voter listening to this, whose life has not been substantively different under Biden or Donald Trump, and frankly might have felt like their economic prospects were better during the Trump administration, why should they, with their vote, care more about preventing Trump from getting elected than the Democratic Party, with all of its millions of dollars, seems to care about Trump getting elected, as it stands to repeat its mistake from 2016, which is to elect, to push, to Pied Piper forward a historically unpopular candidate?
Yeah. Well, because I wish we lived in a world of perfection where every choice was a good choice. And the sad truth is, because of both parties, we're usually left with really shitty choices. That's the truth. And here we have them again, many people would say. But one of them is a corrupt, dangerous man who has no empathy, who will not attract anybody of principle, who is on a revenge mission, and mark my words, may well employ the same strategies that Vladimir Putin and President Xi in China employed to extend their terms. So my question is, do people care more about the practice of democracy, at least preserving the foundations that we do have and then build upon them? Or are you really willing to risk a man who might absolutely crumble those? And by the way, I went to a MAGA rally in New Hampshire 2 weeks ago. I spoke to 50 people in line in the freezing cold, 50 people who were so friendly, so welcoming, so thoughtful, that it really, frankly opened my heart and mind in ways I didn't anticipate, because these were people, many who said they voted for Barack Obama, they were Bernie supporters, and many said they'd never been to a Trump rally before. So I think we're talking the same language. People are looking to him as maybe the answer. And I'm telling you, having spent time with him in the Situation Room in the White House for an hour across the table, being subject to the January 6th insurrection, trapped in the chamber for 20 minutes, which I'd love to tell a story about that. I'm telling you, folks, that's not the answer. And Joe Biden, if it comes down to that, the only answer is Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. I'll be voting for Joe Biden if that's the case, unless data demonstrates that somebody else appears somewhere, third party or interior, that has a better chance, because I think it's that dangerous. Moving forward, absolutely. It's time to fundamentally do everything we can and mobilize to either create competition from the outside or reform the party from the inside, because a handful of people are making decisions that are actually working against, I think, the overwhelming majority of the country, and they're corrupt. They're answering to money and influence peddling, and they've completely turned their back on broad swaths of this country. And that's why, Brianna, if we're going to win, we've got to start using invitation. Confrontation isn't going to cut it. Just damning people who voted for Donald Trump is the stupidest strategy imaginable. I'm going to invite them. Many of them were Barack Obama supporters, for gosh sakes. Come on. That's my case, and I'm really, really upset.
I tend to agree with you on that. I had a little bit of a back and forth with the messaging expert I alluded to earlier
Hmm.
about the use of the word MAGA as a descriptor and whether or not that is becoming a kind of a slur or pejorative that is turning off voters, and whether or not there's still persuasion that can be done with these groups, given how many people are these kind of
Yeah.
Obama to Bernie Trump to Trump voters. But let's drill down on that a little bit. And this brings us to, I think, the big elephant in the room issue wise. A lot of people, regardless of what my personal politics are, I can assess this, I think, honestly. A lot of people, in my experience, are drawn to Donald Trump. And to some degree, we're drawn to Bernie Sanders because of a sense of a sort of America First philosophy, that there was a criticism of trade deals from the 90s that disadvantaged
Yep.
American workers, that there is a frustration with how much money is being spent on military expenditures and sending money to our allies across the world, regardless
Yep.
of the legitimacy of the underlying fight that you or I may feel about what Ukrainians are entitled to in terms of defending their homeland, or what Israel is or isn't entitled to in terms of what is described by some as self-defense, but we can get into that later. The fact of any money going overseas when there's such a crisis of lifestyle crisis in America, where half of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. We talked about the healthcare crisis. The border crisis is being exacerbated by people's feeling that they are living in precarity themselves.
Yeah.
That being said, it does seem like a lot of what's motivating disproportionate interest, not just in returning to Donald Trump, but also in candidates like RFK, and even Ron DeSantis was compelled to, I think, dabble in this, and Vivek Ramaswamy talked about this, was being opposed to these big military expenditures, both in Ukraine and, to a less consistent degree on that side of the aisle, Israel. It seems to me that there's a huge lane that opened up for someone who, unlike Joe Biden or Donald Trump, who are both aligned on the question of military funding to Israel in particular, for someone who is willing to be consistent on this and say, I'm not just going to attack Ukraine funding because Ukraine is perceived as being Biden's war and it makes me look good as a Republican to do that. But if I'm going to have this kind of libertarian American first sensibility, I'm going to apply it evenly to the context of Israel-Palestine, especially since we're looking at a moment where 27,000 Palestinians have been killed in 4 months. The ICJ, the International Criminal Court, has weighed in saying that South Africa's genocide claim against Israel is plausible and can go forward, where we just had Netanyahu and Joe Biden reject this most recent ceasefire deal, which would result in a return of all of the hostages. And we had these settler conferences in last 2 weekends ago in Jerusalem, and statements from senior members of the Israeli cabinet and Netanyahu saying basically that they want to resettle the Gaza Strip. In all of that context, and given the political benefits that seem obvious to giving voice to the majority of Americans who want a ceasefire, why is it that you and others don't, even Marianne Williamson, who I think was the most left candidate in the Democratic primary, refuse to really take the reins and take that lane? What is your principled objection here?
Oh, I think part of the problem here is that I'm not afforded platform to describe how I feel and what I've been saying for 3 months now. And I'm glad you asked the question. First, let me go back again. I lost my dad in the Vietnam War. He only went there because he couldn't afford college. And thank you. I was 6 months old. He couldn't afford college. He had to earn an ROTC scholarship. Went to Vietnam. He was killed when I was 6 months old. My mom was 24 and widowed, and we had nowhere to go. So we lived with my great-grandparents for 3 years when I was just a baby. And I say that because the Vietnam War was the worst example of American foreign policy gone awry, corruption. In fact, I have audio tapes of my dad, Artie, sending his reel-to-reel tapes to my mom saying, you know what, honey, I think we're really here because the Vietnamese want us here because they're making so much money. That's what he said. So this notion, this is not new. We spend almost $1 trillion a year through our Pentagon, which, by the way, hasn't passed an audit, which will under my presidency. Our foreign policy, I think, has been woefully counterproductive. I think our military policy, sadly, is causing many of the very problems that we have to defend ourselves against. I think because of the military industrial complex that is rewarded for making these weapon systems, and they have to create a boogeyman for us to be afraid of and then come to Congress and tell us why we need to pay for these things. So for all those right now who are really dismayed that we spend $1 trillion a year all around the world and have kids going to school hungry and have people sleeping in the streets and have 25 million without health insurance and have $1.7 trillion in educational debt. I mean, and people can't afford their food and fuel. And then Democrats are saying, we want the aid for Israel and Ukraine, and Republicans say only if you do border security. I'm thinking, how about people are starving in our streets and living outside? And we're not even talking about it. Why? Well, because it's politics. And that's how things work. In terms of my policy and my perspective on all this right now, first of all, I'm disgusted. There never should have been a war in Ukraine. In 2014, when Joe Biden was vice president, as you well know, Putin walked right into Crimea and took it with impunity. Impunity. They were massing troops on the Ukrainian border for months before they actually invaded. We knew that, and we didn't stop it. I cannot believe the United States of America, with the levers of power available to us, kinetic power, diplomatic power, foreign aid power, was not able to prevent that. And same thing in Israel. Joe Biden's been in Washington for 50 years. That's 3/4 of the life of the state of Israel. And it's been the same cycle of bloodshed. By the way, he was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, very much responsible for our foreign policy. We've watched the same cycle repeat and repeat and repeat. Why? Because we've been rewarding petroleum companies, protecting their interests for generations, meaning that we have to have nice relations with the Saudis because we rely on petroleum. And when it's really a national security issue, I mean, our foreign policy has been dictated for those interests. And now we've got the most brutal, appalling massacre of human beings I've seen on video in my entire life. 1,400 Israelis attacked and butchered by Hamas. And then the repercussions of that, the innocent loss of life in Gaza is so sickening and heartbreaking. And I'm a Jewish man, Brianna. This is really heartbreaking for me because I do love Israel. It's the only country in the world where people of my faith can take refuge in when and if we need it, because the first boats that left the Holocaust were denied entrance here in the United States of America. So it's really important that Israel exists to me. And it's really important that Palestine exists. I cannot imagine living like the moms and dads and children in Gaza and the West Bank for generations who want the same thing all of us do. And when I'm president, I want to finally recognize the state of Palestine. I cannot wait for Israelis to replace Benjamin Netanyahu and end the settlement policy and Ben Gvir and the right-wing government and the settler violence. It's despicable. And I've told that to Benjamin Netanyahu to his face, sitting at his table in March of this year and then again later in the summer. I'm not shy. And I'm telling you, this will not continue when I'm president because we do not have a choice. We are maybe months or years away from nuclear weapons being placed in backpacks that can be walked into any city in this world and detonated. And if we don't invest in peace, invest in prosperity, and ensure people have something to protect, whether that's Gary, Indiana, or the Gaza Strip, we have not done our jobs. And these leaders of the past, from the West Bank to the West Wing, they're all responsible. That's Netanyahu, that's Mahmoud Abbas, and that's Joe Biden.
So just to be clear, do you support cutting aid to Israel as it continues this bombardment? Do you support a ceasefire? What is your position on what you would do differently now than Joe Biden?
I think I was certainly the first Jewish member and one of the first to say, first of all, I hope everyone knows we still have 6 Americans being held hostage. And what I've said from the very beginning is release the hostages, a ceasefire concurrent with the release of hostages. That's all I want. Let the hostages go.
Well, that was the plan. That's the Hamas plan that was just rejected by Netanyahu. When people are listening to this, it'll be last week.
Yeah, no, and that's what I just said, Brianna. I've said that from the get-go. Release the hostages concurrent with a ceasefire. My proposition was this. Then a multinational task force that maintains the peace. We create a Marshall Plan to invest finally in Gaza and the West Bank, infrastructure, civil society. And then if we don't do a Marshall Plan, there's nothing. They have to have something to protect. And Israel can't do it. The US can't do it. It's got to be other countries collaborating. And yes, I cannot stand what I'm seeing. This is the most heartbreaking, horrifying, disgusting visuals I've ever seen in my life, Brianna. And as for aid, I want to see, and by the way, I voted against the aid bill just 3 days ago in the House. I think I was the only member, I may be the only Jewish member along with Jamie Raskin to do so. I voted against it. One of the reasons is because the Republicans stripped the humanitarian aid for Gaza from that bill.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't vote for it. Not very popular amongst, a lot of the circles in which, you have to run when you're running for president. But the fact of the matter, it was the right thing to do. And I will always take the courageous, principled position, even when it is literally people of my faith who are the ones suffering in Israel. And of course, my Muslim brothers and sisters suffering in Gaza, the West Bank, and now even around the country with Islamophobia. And, we need to repair at home. We need to repair overseas. And we have to invest in peace, Brianna. I lost my dad, and I think about it. I wear his dog tag right here because I think about him every damn day about, this poor Jewish kid from St. Paul, Minnesota, that just wanted to be self-sufficient and have a chance for his kid and his wife, right? And he lost his life halfway around the world, fighting for what, right? And I'm the lucky one. So I have a responsibility to think of all these dead Israeli kids, all the dead Gazan kids, all the dead Palestinian kids for generations, kids who are suffering from famine, kids in our own backyards who aren't getting educated and have nobody looking after them or mentoring them. I mean, gosh, this is America, for God's sakes. So people are wondering who the heck I am. Believe me, I'm sick of it. And I'm not going to tolerate it. And I'm not part of a system any longer that's going to reward people who want to stick around forever and put their self-interests over our collective interests.
I appreciate that, Representative Phillips, but I just want to drill down a little bit just so I'm clear. It sounds like you're supportive of a two-state solution.
Absolutely.
Joe Biden has been saying, and the State Department spokespeople have been saying, we are for a two-state solution. As I'm sure you're aware, Benjamin Netanyahu not only opposes a two-state solution, he has opposed a two-state solution and said over my dead body for the duration of his career, and has taken actions to help make that less and less possible, including supporting the settler movement in the West Bank, and also by literally funding Hamas to make sure that there is not what is perceived to be a reasonable political leadership in the Gaza Strip with whom to broker peace. And you can see now how the existence of Hamas is being used to justify swatting down these ceasefire agreements, saying, well, we have to get rid of every member of Hamas before we're willing to stop bombing this largely civilian population. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what do you make then of people who push back and say it's a nice thing to say, but Biden is saying that knowing that it's not a possibility, one, because of Netanyahu, and two, because there has been this encroachment into Palestinian territory to an extent that it seems impossible. The experts seem to say it's next to impossible to imagine what a contiguous kind of a nation state would even look like at this point.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I dwell in possibilities. I don't want to keep going back to Biden, but man, he's been there 50 years, Brianna. 50, half of a century, 3/4 of the life of the state of Israel. The Foreign Relations Committee chairman, vice president for 8 years, president for 3. I'm someone who believes the proof is in the pudding. Show me the results. Is anything better in the Middle East than it was 50 years ago? It is exactly the same. We've wasted hundreds of billions of dollars, thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of Palestinian lives, thousands of Israeli lives. There's no more freedom in the entire region. There's more, if anything, there's less stability, more oppression, more misery. You know what? The proof is in the pudding, and I'm disgusted by it. And I think Netanyahu has to go. I think he is bad for the state of Israel. The settlement policy, a big part of the problem. I do envision a Palestinian state with Jewish people living in it, just as there's a Jewish state with Muslim Palestinians living in it. I think that would be healthy to have a shared, if you will, responsibility. And I think it's time for the entire world. I want to work with the Chinese to establish a Palestinian state. I think one of the biggest problems, believe it or not, Brianna, is since there's no other democracy in the Middle East other than Israel right now, I don't know if the Gulf nations and all the dictatorships and kingdoms are going to want to help create a state in which there will be free and fair elections and self-determination. Think about that. Because if it happened for the Palestinians, others around the whole region are going to say, well, gosh, we want the same thing. So that's going to be one of the biggest impediments. But if we don't try, Israel will never be safe. And of course, Palestinians will never have any hope. And that is not a way to live.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but given the repeated long-term and stated commitment of these states to a Palestinian state, the fact that Saudi Arabia has stopped its normalization, its very profitable normalization with Israel, and the negotiations the United States has been doing in that regard because of its support, its people's support of Palestine. The fact that after having waged war on Yemen for all of these years, it is now weirdly standing on the same side because Palestine is such a uniting issue in the region. Obviously, so many Palestinian refugees live in these surrounding countries, not by choice, but because they were forced out by the creation of Israel in 1948. It is, if anything, the thing that seems to be uniting various religious groups and political disputes across the region like almost nothing else. But to stay just on this subject a little bit, because I want complete clarity,
Sure.
I want to ask you if you see the value in there being religious pluralism and ethnic pluralism within Israel and within a future Palestinian state. And living in the United States of America, which has the second largest Jewish population, and frankly, after the events of October 7th, demonstrably the safest Jewish population in the world, why does there need to be a two-state solution as opposed to a one-state solution that is genuinely democratic and that genuinely invests the same rights and privileges to both Arab, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish citizens?
Well, first, let me also say one thing about the Arab nations, which have done very little to help the Palestinian cause other than talk. Very, very little. In fact, when I was last in Saudi Arabia, I had to make some calls for them to reestablish paying their commitments to the East Jerusalem hospital. Over decades, the Palestinian cause, they would elevate when it was helpful to them, but then they'd forget about it. If there was really a will in the Arab world, the Middle East, to establish a Palestinian state, it could have been done decades ago and should have been. And it takes willing nations.
How can you say? I really don't want to debate this. One, because I'm not an expert in the history of the region, but even my cursory knowledge. I mean, they all went to war over trying to have a Palestinian state. How can you say? And they're hosting millions of Palestinian refugees and have done so for years. So it starts to sound a little bit like you're making the argument that so many conservatives make, which is to say nobody wants Palestinians anyway. The fact that Egypt won't let them be ethnically cleansed through the Rafah Gate is a demonstration of how horrible this population is. I mean, can you see how that's what this is starting to sound like?
But I respect you. That's not what it sounds like for me at all. I'm telling you the historical truth. The Arab world has not done much to actually create Palestinian safety, security, and self-determination. And I'm telling you why. Because self-determination equals freedom, which equals a risk to their own kingdoms. It's just the truth, Brianna. That is absolutely the truth. And that's been a very underappreciated undercurrent of, I think, why there hasn't been a state created, because America wants a democratic state, and I think Israel does too, because most of us believe democracy usually yields a government that is the most reasonable with which to work, not terrorists. On the other hand, none of the other Arab states want that because freedom is a risk to themselves. That's the truth. I don't know why that sounds like a weird talking point.
Well, because
that's historically accurate.
It's against what they are quite explicitly stating, but we don't really have to litigate that. I don't think that's really in front of people.
I'm sharing some news that maybe people are not aware of, and that is the truth. They don't want a free and self-determination.
Okay.
They don't want self-determination.
But to get back to this question, because I would argue that the Jewish state has done not only not very much to help there being a Palestinian state, but has aggressively and against international law worked to thwart the existence of a Palestinian state, as has the United States of America and its Western allies. So the question on the table is, why not a one-state solution? We're Americans. We're proud of living in a religious and racial pluralistic society, a nation of immigrants.
I'll tell you very simply. I'm a Jewish person, and I do know history. And the fact is, Israel has been attacked since the very founding of the country in 1947, 1948. I think you know that. I'm sure everybody else knows that. Constantly attacked. This is well before settlements, well before anything else. This is the earliest lines of the state. Constantly attacked. No one even talks about it. Bus bombings, terrorist bombings, and the PLO killings at the Munich Olympic. Well, if I can just,
sure,
you can talk or you can let me talk. I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm trying to express something that's true, and I'm really getting tired, frankly, of progressives not having any willingness to open their hearts to a whole nother people's history that I think is really important. And it's this: there are 200 Christian majority nations in the entire world. There are 140 Muslim majority nations in the entire world. There is one Jewish majority nation in the entire world. One. And why? Because 6 million of people of my faith, just because we pray from the Old Testament and not the New, were murdered. And my family came to America because they were escaping pogroms because they were being murdered. And now Jewish people are being attacked because they're Jewish. There's one country, Brianna. I don't understand why progressives do not understand that we are the underdog too. We have been for world history. And I think it's high time, frankly. This is really important to me.
Yeah, sure.
This is really important. I don't look like someone who needs any affection or support or protection, probably. I look like a white man, right? Well, let me tell you, people of my faith are being attacked, and they have been for world history, including 6 million of us killed in the Holocaust, including family members of mine, I'm sure, and pogroms that forced my family away. And now we're subject to sickening, vile anti-Semitism every day. One country. All we're saying is one country of the people of our faith to seek refuge in. And if you have one country that now combines millions of Palestinians, there's no more Jewish country in the world. And if America could have said, you know what, when the first boats left the Holocaust and came to this country, that we would have accepted them, maybe a different story. But Brianna, there is no place for Jewish people to go. And I would just ask that you open your heart.
Yeah.
But let me just finish.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were
finished.
Ask
you to open your heart to what it's like to not look like someone who maybe needs some help. But let me tell you, speaking for millions of Jewish people around the world right now, I think it's really offensive that progressives have totally forgotten history and what the misery of being Jewish has been for generations and generations and generations, for reasons that I do not really understand, but is real. So please, don't let that progressive love stop at my door. Well, okay.
I'll help you understand. For one, Representative Phillips, strikes me as a little ironic that you're going to say to me in my face as a Black American who doesn't have the option of someone that the United Nations and the international community having intervened on my behalf to create an entire country for my people who have zero options of some place to flee, who have been living in an apartheid state of our own in the United States of America, which has the 25% of the world's prison population that was disproportionately filled with my people, who was reported this week, substantively make all of the paint and slave labor products in the United States of America so we can compete with China and the rest of the world. The idea that you're looking at me and saying that I don't have empathy and can't open my heart to the psychic
I said
idea.
Progressive, Brianna, I do have empathy. That's what I'm asking for.
I am a progressive, so I'm speaking to you as a progressive, but also as a Black progressive. I have enormous empathy. Wait a minute. I have enormous empathy for the reasons why Jewish people want a Jewish state. I talk about this on the podcast a lot. There is a big part of me that says, oh, I get it, because I do not feel safe in the United States of America, not just me as an individual, but statistically as an aggregate. There's not a metric in the world that you can look at that says that this is a good place for Black Americans to be, that Black Americans are faring well in the United States of America. And I take your point, but it's also true that I know you and I are sitting here as two people who are not Christian in a predominantly Christian state. And there are Christians in America who make this very similar argument about America that it seems to me many people make about Israel, which is, oh, this is a Christian nation. And if immigration trends change and suddenly it does not become as much of a Christian nation, that we should rig the immigrant population to maintain the national character of the United States of America. We call that Christian nationalism, and we think that that's a bigoted principle and that we should not be picking and choosing who comes to this country to maintain some kind of ethnic or religious character that benefits the existing majority. We say, as Americans, we value pluralism and that every kind of person brings their own benefit and that we should protect the least of these and have laws that protect minorities because we value being a nation where minorities can be saved. Not that we have to rig the system so that we are majorities so that we can then dominate over the rest, right? So it strikes me as much as I empathize. When you tell the story of Jewish ships full of Jewish people after the Holocaust being turned away, I've spoken at length on this podcast about how disgusted I was to discover that Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father, application was turned away and how close they came to be able to immigrate to America. I'm disgusted by it. But the question is, why should the actions of an anti-Semitic America and an anti-Semitic Europe be paid for by the people of Palestine who had absolutely nothing to do with the horrors of the Holocaust?
I mean, Brianna, first, let me strike at the heart of what you just said earlier, which is my empathy for Black America and the long tail of slavery that is so abhorrent and so visible and so obvious that I cannot believe we have not repaired that injustice. I want to honor that and acknowledge that. If anything, I'm telling you, I empathize with that. I was asking for mutual empathy, and I don't know if you just shared it with me, but I think you did. But you just asked a question of something that is just, it's just so historically inaccurate. Israel has been attacked because it's a Jewish state for decades. Now, Netanyahu's a different story. I'm not going to support him. What's happening right now is abhorrent, and his policies are abhorrent. It's true. And you can imagine it's not an easy thing to say for someone like me, but it is true. And I'm bold and I'm being honest and I understand. I cannot tolerate seeing this any longer. But Israel has been attacked since the day it was established by the free world after the Holocaust. It was attacked by its neighbors, and they survived.
That's like saying that American settlers were attacked by Native Americans because they were white or because they were Christian.
Oh boy, Brianna, holy moly, boy! I'm telling you, I got to tell you, I'm expressing empathy for Palestinians, for Muslims, for Black Americans. I'm not feeling what I'm surprised, to be honest with you, and I'm offended.
What is surprising about this, Representative?
I'm just surprised. I'm surprised by the lack. I just explained it. I'm surprised by the lack of empathy of progressives relative to the Jewish people and the state of Israel, not Benjamin Netanyahu.
What do you say, Dean Phillips, to the thousands and thousands of Jewish advocates for Palestinian rights who comprise organizations like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace? And people like, frankly, Bernie Sanders, I think, could go a little farther. He still won't say the word ceasefire, but who was arguing in front of Congress to actually have us follow our own laws and limit aid based on the humanitarian actions of Israel. This is not a issue on which Jewish people are all on one side or the other. I had a Holocaust historian from Dartmouth on a couple of weeks ago talking about all of the different prongs of Zionism and how we have this revisionist history of what it means to be a Zionist, and how many Jewish thought leaders from Albert Einstein all the way down were highly critical of the Zionist project precisely because they saw it as replicating the harms that were done to Jews in Europe on a new population. And that never again was supposed to mean never again for anyone. We're not talking about a historical record where Jewish people just decided to immigrate to the land of Palestine and live alongside. There were Jews, Arab Jews, that lived in Palestine since time immemorial. That's not the question. In peace and prosperity. The question is whether or not a land grant from a colonial power like the UK can be given because of guilt, much well-earned guilt, frankly, over the anti-Semitism and a refusal to accept the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust, and to offload the issue onto another part of the world. And as I'm sure you're aware, there was a conversation about whether or not Israel should be located in Africa. But for various reasons, and I highly recommend people go back to listen to our episode with the Zionist historian of Zionism, it ended up being in Palestine. And so that is a kind of original sin that I see as very akin to
where the Jewish people originated. I mean, that's the whole point.
That's fine.
That's fine. That's the whole point. That's where the Jewish people originated.
You cannot have there are Ukrainian Jews and Russian Jews and Polish Jews and French Jews and British Jews and Jewish people who have been living in Europe for centuries and decades, centuries and centuries. And on the other hand, you have Palestinians who are 80 years old, who are clutching the keys to the houses that they grew up in. They're on the other side of the wall, who have been told that they cannot go home because my Jewish friend who's born in Philadelphia gets to have a right of return, but they do not. Like that is the injustice that we're talking about here. If we're talking about moral weight and what was deserved after the Holocaust, you have my utmost sympathy. You have my utmost empathy. But the question isn't what is owed, it is what is owed from whom. And why is it that Europe gets to offload its own responsibilities? The Jewish state wasn't in Poland. I bet you a whole lot of people who have been chased out of their lands and put into concentration camps would have loved to feel safe in a land where they spoke the language and they had their own community and they had their own belongings and the like. But this is
the only reason they were living there, Brianna, is because they were forced there by the Tsar. It's hard to listen to, but go ahead. I'm just,
I don't need to belabor
I'm listening.
I mean, that's fine. And we can all sit here and be offended. But the question now isn't really, and it's a moot point because in large part, Israel won this battle. They have established a country and nobody's...
You're attacking me in a funny way because I'm telling you, what's so interesting is I'm not sure you heard what I said. I'm a Jewish man running for president of the United States of America who wants to recognize the state of Palestine. I believe that we should invest in the state of Palestine. If I could just say what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be a voice of decency, of compassion, of reason in the absence of it. And if you look at the other people running for president, Brianna, my goodness, I'm telling you, I'm appalled. I want this to end. It should have never started. And yes, Hamas is a horrific, despicable terrorist organization that needs to be eliminated. Benjamin Netanyahu should not be, I don't think, the prime minister of Israel moving forward. And I pray that Israelis make a change. Israel is the only multicultural, multi-faith, free country in the entire Middle East. As Richie Torres says, it's the only place where he, as a gay man, could be alive, let alone thrive. And look I'm trying to be decent. Okay, Brianna, I'm trying to be compassionate and decent.
Gay marriage isn't legal in Israel.
I'm sorry?
Gay marriage is not legal in Israel. And interfaith marriage is not legal in Israel. People have to fly to Cyprus to get married if you want to marry a Christian or a Muslim or anybody else. I mean, let's just be honest about what we're doing here.
Entire Middle East. Okay.
Let's just the question. The reason we're circling around. I appreciate that. Frankly, yes, you are. I think closer to my politics than Joe Biden for sure. And that's what we're talking about in the Democratic primary.
Brianna, Brianna, I would love to continue the conversation. I was just notified actually that something serious just happened. I've got to...
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll let you go, but I just do want to get this out. My question was about why you don't support a one-state solution. That's why we're here, because the reality is that the elected officials...
First of all, I seriously have to go. Let me tell you this. I would love to have this conversation because I like to learn. And I like to understand your perspective on it. I'd like to listen to others too. I'm not so hardened in my heart on anything that thoughtful perspectives from other people can't change my mind. I'd like to listen and learn to you. I have my own opinions. I did not mean to be antagonistic at all. In fact, I'm suffering like a lot of people right now. And by the way, I want to honor yours. Yeah. I gotta go, and I'm so sorry, but I'd love to continue the conversation on this subject and
no
so
problem.
many others.
I really do appreciate your time. Maybe we can get you back with some other people, with some Jewish progressives that can maybe help clarify the position here, who are much more expert on this issue. But thank you so much. I really did enjoy this conversation.
That's what I wanted to let you know. So I appreciate you too, Brianna. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the spirited conversation. Hopefully we can get him back with maybe either the Zionist scholar that I was referencing before, or someone like Katie Halper, Aaron Mate, or Max Blumenthal, who can get more into the history with him. Maybe somebody with a little bit of a softer touch. Let's brainstorm what that could look like and what that could be. But I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did and saw a different side of the candidate that we've been seeing in these 7-minute rare MSNBC interviews and the like. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. You can always get more Bad Faith at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. As always, take care of yourselves and keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.